George Rodriguez has been a professional photographer since the 1960s. For more than 4 decades, he photographed some of the most famous celebrities of our time, but he also documented the cultural and political events of the Mexican-American community in Los Angeles. The result is a compelling body of work that reveals two very distinct views of Los Angeles in Southern California: life on the red carpet and life on the streets. His work is a visual record of some of the most seminal episodes in the city's history: the Sunset Strip riots of the 60s, the Chicano movement of the early 70s, the United Farm Workers movement, and the 1992 Los Angeles riots, along with lots of other things. His photographs have been featured in numerous museums and galleries, including the Getty Museum, the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles, the Grammy Museum, the Museum of Latin American Art, and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Several of his photographs are in the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery collection in Washington, D.C. And in 2018, The Double Vision of George Rodriguez, a book-length retrospective of his career with text by Josh Kuhn, was published by Hat and Beard Press. So I guess we're just going to start. George, just tell us a little bit about how you got into photography. Like, give me a little bit of background on where you grew up and how you came about to start getting interested in photography.
Well, my parents came here in 1935 from Texas, and they were on their honeymoon. They decided to stay. So I'm very fortunate to be born and raised here in LA. And I really appreciate being involved with the LA City Historical Society. It's very special to me. And I'm a product of the LA City school system. I went to 9th Street School, which is referred to as the Skid Row School. And I didn't realize that until later on. But I love the school. I never felt that it wasn't anything but the best. And I went to Edison Junior High School, and I learned photography at Fremont High School. And I think it's little known that Fremont High School years ago, because I guess of funding and so on, Fremont had an incredible photography, professional or vocational photography department, and they turned out a great many of Life magazine photographers. And I think that's what influenced me to be a photojournalist, because I kind of studied Life magazine and I wanted to be able to duplicate what they did, especially civil rights kind of work that they did. I think when I saw the coverage on the African American movement, when they, the civil rights movement beginning in, I guess, in the 60s, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to shoot stuff like that. So later on, in the 60s, early 70s is when the Mexican-American Chicano movement began. So I got my opportunity because I was aware of those leaders that led that fight anyway. So I was fortunate to know things that would happen before they did happen, like the walkouts of the high schools and the Chicano moratorium march against the war.
I'm going to skip through. Hang on a second, because I'm going through. I'll come back to this in a minute. Okay, let's get this caught up. This is what you're talking about here. The walkout.
Yeah, that's a photograph in 1968 of Mexican American kids walking out of high school because they felt they weren't getting an education and they wanted to make a statement. So yeah, when the title of my book is called Double Vision, and the reason being is because this picture reminds me that when I ran the photography lab at Columbia Studios, I would take off on my lunch hour and drive to East LA and shoot these photographs because I knew that these walkout events were going on. So then I would run back to Columbia.
So what's going on in this picture here? Is this part of the walkout? Did this take place during the walkouts? The photograph we're looking at right now?
That is, the walkouts at Roosevelt High School. And Um, yeah, I know that it was unfortunate for those young people because um, I think the LAPD had a field day because I mean, what could they do? I mean, they got beat up pretty badly, and I don't know if it made any progress really as far as education went, but at least it did draw the attention to the the kids in high schools in East Los Angeles not getting a good education, and that was the reason for the walkouts.
Now, what was the significance of that overall in terms of like, why is this an important event? Why do we, why would, do you feel it was important to document it?
Well, for me, I just wanted, because people, the general public doesn't know these events happen, and that's why I felt I had to cover them and document this so I could share it with other people. And eventually, they did get a lot of publicity, and in fact, eventually, a film called Walkout was made. This photograph is taken the day after Robert Kennedy died here in Los Angeles.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, they had a requiem procession and in East Los Angeles. It went from Belvedere Park down Brooklyn Avenue to East LA College. Brooklyn Avenue now being Cesar Chavez Boulevard.
What was, I mean, obviously there, I've noticed several of your photographs feature um, some people in the Chicano community with these signs saying, talking about Bobby Kennedy. What was this? There was a special affection for Bobby Kennedy, or I mean, why
Well,
was he?
yeah, I think like most, you know, Latinos, African Americans, they love the Kennedy family, especially Robert Kennedy. And as far as Latinos go, especially Robert Kennedy, because he spent some time in Delano with Cesar Chavez. And in fact, I read somewhere where Robert Kennedy had stated that one of the reasons he decided to run was because of a conversation with Cesar Chavez. So yeah, he's pretty well liked by the Latino community.
You sort of jumped ahead of me a little bit here, so I want to go back a moment because one thing I want to make clear that hopefully the audience understands is that before you started documenting the local activism, you had done a lot of work doing celebrity photography, correct? And
Yeah, and my whole photographic career is not. I never planned anything. It just seemed things would happen. When I started working in photography, my first job was when I was in high school. It was in a photo lab after school. So by the time I graduated from high school, I had already spent 2 years working in a professional lab. So then that kind of continued into more professional labs in the Hollywood area to where I ended up actually being the manager running the color lab at Columbia Studios. And my connection with the red carpets and shooting celebrities was that I was processing film for the top studio photographers in Hollywood for Columbia Studios, for 20th Century, Paramount. At Columbia, we processed all the stills for films like Lawrence of Arabia, West Side Story, um, Breakfast at Tiffany's, that last film that Marilyn Monroe did. And so, in any case, the way I began is that these photographers that would bring their film to our lab, they would get credentials to go to the premieres, and but it would be beneath them to show up behind a rope at a red carpet because they shot these celebrities and movie stars in their studios. So they knew that I would go. So they would give me their credentials and I went. So I loved it. It was just incredible to be on a red carpet taking pictures of these big movie stars. And I shot at that time on speculation. You just take your pictures and send them in, and maybe 10% of the time you sold something. But when you did, it was incredible. This picture that's up now of Frank Sinatra and Lucille Ball, I'm probably like 5 feet away from them. But this was 1962, and that time was a whole different time than even 10, 20 years ago. At this time, I think professional photographers were behaved like professionals, and they weren't like so-called paparazzi. So I was able to get pretty close to these celebrities and take photos like this.
And so we got, oh, tell me a little bit about, now that speaking of celebrities, tell me about this picture here, I think for.
Well, because Columbia was on, this is 1966. And again, when I got off work, because Columbia was on Sunset and Gower, I would just drive down to the Strip and just shoot stuff there. And this particular shot, I was shooting an album cover on Van Morrison, and the house band at the Whiskey A Go Go at that time were the Doors. So this is, a very iconic historical photograph of both Van and Jim Morrison, because nobody else has this. There was no one else there but myself. But you never know what's going to happen later. At this time, the Doors had not even recorded an album yet, so nobody knew who they were. So it isn't until years later this, a shot of Jim Morrison with Van Morrison become bigger than life, because it's very rare. But like I say, I was there to shoot Van Morrison.
And Jim just happened to be there, and you got a
Exactly.
moment.
Well, no, not this time. I had to be there to shoot Van Morrison. But the last set, one of the bands stayed on the stage, and the other band joined them. So I continued to take photographs. That previous photo of Michael, that's in Michael Jackson's room, and they had just shortly come from Gary, Indiana. One of my claims to fame is that I did the liner photos on the first Jackson 5 album. And it was amazing to me to be around a young person like this. At this time, Michael Jackson is not known, but very shortly he becomes a superstar. When I took the photos of them at the Forum for the album cover, they were introduced by Diana Ross. And seeing them perform live that evening, I knew, that I was witnessing something special. I mean, Michael Jackson was a superstar right from the beginning.
And one more, just bring us a little closer to time. You did it. Was it an album cover you were doing for NWA, or was it a publicity shot, or how did this come about?
You mean Eazy-E?
Right.
Well, again, I was on staff at a couple African American magazines, and they would, they would have the pulse of what's going on, and so when I took these pictures of Eazy-E and NWA, although they weren't extremely well known yet, I just knew here you're in the presence of something very special. And so when you feel that way and you know that, you do the best you can. So these pictures of the Eazy, I love, and I feel so fortunate to have them, because it's amazing. When I have exhibits, I can have like 20 photographs in a show. And the one that is more meaningful is a portrait like this of Eazy-E. because of who he was and the impact that people like Easy have on the whole world. To me, he's like the John Lennon of rap. Like he created hardcore rap like you'd never heard before. During this session, when we were done, Easy gave me 4 cassettes, and I played one in my car on my way home, and it was incredible. You know, I loved it so much. It was just incredible because I was raised in South Central, so I knew what NWA was talking about, and so I was so pleased that somebody had put it on tape, although I knew that this stuff could never be played on the air. But still, I still have these cassettes, and they're my favorite things. It's amazing how what inspires you. Easy gave me Straight Outta Compton tape, and if I need some inspiration, I play it. It's my favorite. It's the only rap tape I really love.
Now, I believe you told me that while you were doing these, when you first started documenting some of the activist, the demonstrations and the protests, things that you were still doing your regular work during the day, and you're trying to do this other stuff like on your lunch hour and at night or stuff. So you're sort of going back and forth between these two environments. Is that fair to say?
Oh, sure, definitely. Yeah, and both worlds are quite different. You know, I would never share my civil rights stuff at that time with people that I was shooting that involved, you know, rock and roll and television and movie stars, because they didn't get it. No, they didn't care. You know, just didn't care.
This is the memorial for Robert Kennedy. And now, one reason I wanted to include this in our presentation was because you had the Brown Berets here. Can you tell me a little bit about the Brown Berets?
Well, the Brown Berets, they did security on a lot of things. They did security on this march, this Requiem March for Robert Kennedy, and the guy in the middle, that's David Sanchez. He's the creator, leader of the Brown Berets, and he's still around. They're still around, but you know, it's a different time.
But I mean, for those who, especially those who are too young to have known about this when it was happening, what were the Brown Berets? I mean,
Well, they were sort of a takeoff on maybe the Black Panthers. Brown Berets, I don't know exactly, you know, what they did other than they did security for events, but I never really, you know, was into their manifesto, or I don't know what their goals were.
This is, I think, probably one of your most iconic photographs. I mean, this has appeared all over the place. You see, even this photograph has popped up all over the world. Tell me a little bit about this.
Well, this is taken at Lincoln Heights High School. They had one weekend, they had a big festival there. I think it was called Fiesta de los Barrios. And this gal was just, I believe she was 15 years old. And the Berets had like a stand there, and she was just there. And so, like I say, you take a photo because it seems interesting, but yeah, but it's true. Yeah, again, this photograph has a lot of life. I see it myself all over the place, and in fact, posters have been done from the photograph.
And didn't you tell me she was part of this group of women or young women who split off and formed their own sort of group?
Yeah, they did. Initially, the Brown Berets, I think, included men and women, but understand that the women didn't really have much influence, and what was going on. So they divided themselves. They started their own beret group called Las Adelitas, and they kind of ran themselves.
And was it that name based on the sort of the women combatants during the Mexican Revolution? Is that, I think, that where the name came from?
Well, I don't know. I just felt that they had no. They felt they needed more of a voice in the movement, and so, like I said, they split off and formed their own group, Las Adelitas.
Okay, I want to move on now. Just, okay, tell me about this. What's this event here?
Well, that's a moratorium march against the war in 1970, and I feel this is a turning point of the whole Chicano movement. At this time, people were more aware that there was a Chicano movement, and this was a huge event. And unfortunately, there was a couple of people killed that day, including Ruben Salazar. That was he worked for the LA Times, and he's also director for KMEX, the Spanish TV station in LA. And he was shot by a sheriff under very controversial circumstances.
This is from the same
No,
event?
these are the walkouts. These are walkouts at.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I thought it was all part of this.
Yeah. This is an LAPD. The moratorium was the authorities there were sheriffs, LA County sheriffs.
Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha. And then, oh, tell me about this picture.
Well, this photograph, there was a time when I always had my camera with me, and when I was conscious of trying to record everything I could, because when you see this, it's like graffiti, but it's also almost a mural, and they're not up very long. And this is the saying is better live one day as a lion than 100 days a lamb. Is a sort of a takeoff on what Emiliano Zapata said about living one day on your feet and 100 days or 100 years on your knees. I forget the exact wording, but it's put up there by the Chicano Liberation Front. And what's interesting, though, about this particular photograph is that there's a group called Rage Against the Machine, and Zach de la Rocha, he's I guess I don't know if he's the leader or founder of the group, but he bought this photograph and called his next group One Day as a Lion. On the internet, there's a lot of questions as to where they can see this photograph. So fortunately, it's being posted here so people can see it, because it's really not anywhere where it can be viewed.
Okay. Now I want to move on. Tell me a little bit about how you got involved in with.
Well, this is in Delano, California, during the Great Boycott in '68. And at this time, like, you hear people that are out there, and you hear the name Cesar Chavez, and I couldn't wait to meet him and see what was going on. But unfortunately, then I got an assignment from West Magazine. It was a supplement with the LA Times, to go to Delano and kind of spend some time around Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers. So that's what I did, and I was fortunate enough to have a couple of minutes where I had his attention, because he was extremely busy. All the time I was there, I never, it didn't bother me that I wasn't able to spend more time around him, because I could see that he was just always surrounded by people making decisions and just staying very busy. So I was very fortunate, like I say, to get this photograph because everything about it I like, you know, the lighting. And um, when you're around an individual that, again, you know, there's something going on here, and so you do the best you can. And again, this is one of my favorite photographs, and I've been told it's the iconic photograph of Cesar Chavez.
I think it's probably the most famous photograph. It's certainly the image that comes to mind when I hear his name. And again, we have Kennedy in the corner, which is interesting that.
Right, yeah, and this is a few months after Robert Kennedy had been killed, and so those banners remained up there.
Didn't you tell me though, when you met him that day, that he was surprised that you were the guy showing up because Rodriguez?
Yeah, I think the very first thing that eventually when I got to actually talk with Cesar Chavez, first thing he told me was that he was surprised that somebody named Rodriguez was coming from the LA Times. And of course, I told him that I wasn't on staff. I'm just a freelancer because at that time, I don't know that there were any Latinos working for the Times at all, or in any of the major outlets.
Now, again, for those, especially for those who might be watching who are too young to have known about this, tell me a little bit about what the UFW was all about and the strike, what was going on, and why this was significant.
Well, they've always struggled. United Farm Workers, they've never, I feel, really gotten all the support that they should have, and it's so important. I mean, when you're there, you wish that you yourself could do more. This is like 5 o'clock in the morning in the grape fields. They would have a small mass before the workers and picketers would picket out in the grape fields because they were harassed so much by by just even the police department in Delano harassed them. So it's just always a struggle. And for me, just to be out like in this heat, very dusty, very hot, to have to work, to have to, you're dressed like a zombie picking grapes. I don't think they could be paid enough, yet they're not paid what they should be making. And at this time, they were still fighting for breaks and water breaks and, to keep their union together. These men here are Filipinos, and they're a good representative of the farm workers in the fields at that time, because there are a lot of Filipinos and of course a lot of Latinos and some African Americans, and
Well, that brings up this next picture here.
people that were picketing were Anglos primarily, or a lot of them. Yeah, this photograph to me is interesting because the placards are all in Spanish, yet the picketers holding them are African American.
So it wasn't just a Latino movement. It was, you said it was very diverse in a lot of ways.
No, initially, in fact, I think the beginning of the union were Filipinos and Mexican Americans joining to become one, as I recall. And so, yeah, no, there were definitely, I guess you can just simply call them farm workers.
And then we've got, let's see, tell me now what's going on here. This is 92, correct?
This is in Pico Union, or I should say Koreatown, I guess it's also known as. It's just probably either during or day after the riots of '92. Um, I never know exactly some pictures why I take them. It just um, like I say, you try to document and show people that were not there what was going on. The photograph is like frozen. You can study it once you have it.
So that's a burned out, is that a house or a storefront below?
It's a commercial business.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is one of the casualties of the riots. Um, Now this last one, I just like this one. I don't know. So what's the story here? Do you remember anything
Well,
particular about it?
there was a time again when my whole time spent, when I wasn't actually working somewhere, is just to cruise neighborhoods and take pictures because I felt that I was going to do this book on the Mexican American Chicano experience. So I have a great many of this type of photographs. Um, but this one, I mean, this is what you kind of hope that you walk up on. And originally, this is during the Vietnam War, 1970. So I saw this guy, and before once I had the photograph, I realized that I didn't know whether he was coming or going, um, either coming home or going to the war, whatever. But I realized that he's I would say he's coming home, because if he wasn't coming home, he would have gotten a ride to wherever they would take him. But yeah, no, to me, I think it's what you see in the photograph, and a lot of people feel that this guy is coming home, and probably his family will be extremely grateful to see him.
Well, let me ask a couple of general questions here, if you might. Now, you've been doing this. You were a professional photographer since the early '60s, correct? I mean, you were getting paid to take pictures as far back as. How has the First of all, let's talk about the business part. How has the business changed since then?
Oh boy, that's a hard question. I, when I retired, well, I don't know that actually, I'm working harder today than I was when I was actually taking pictures, because it seems like everything is so time consuming. But um, today, I can't even begin to tell you with the technology. I mean, people take incredible photos with their phones, and so if you're working today, obviously, primarily you're shooting digital, so that's a big difference. Um, when 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 I stopped shooting film about I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, um, if you're hired to do an assignment, you shot both black and white and color. Black and white would be, Kodak, probably Tri-X film. If you're shooting color, then it's Kodak, most likely Ektachrome, and that's a transparency film. The difference today for me, because of my experience in, working in photography labs, is that a few years ago, when you shot color, you were shooting transparency film, and there were so many factors that you hope that that particular emulsion was good. It didn't go to, primarily to a color like magenta, or that the lab that processed that film was a good lab and kept their chemicals up. And there was just so many problems you could have technically. Today, you can take your little digital card to a drugstore and the color is right on. I mean, right on. There's no problems. That's a big difference. Um, and I can't speak for people shooting digital today, but I think that they work as hard as people that were shooting film. Um, One thing I know, when I at the tail end of my career, and I was shooting digital, when I took on jobs, I stressed to people that I didn't want somebody calling me tonight to look at some images, and sure enough, it would happen often. So I think with the technology, you're always, on call to supply somebody.
Um, what you were shooting 35 millimeter mostly, or were you doing two and a
Right.
quarter?
I shot 35 primarily. Um, if it was something special, if you're shooting like a magazine cover, then they would want you to shoot a bigger format, which is 2 1/4, with a Hasselblad, and the quality of Hasselblad cameras. 2 1/4 was good enough. But, it doesn't get much better than that. But primarily, if for photojournalism, you shoot in 35.
And because I would think one of the big difference between when you started out versus today, obviously, when you're shooting film, every frame is precious, especially if you're shooting 2 1/4. So you have to be careful. You can't just you can't just machine gun it. You can't just go in and shoot everything. But whereas today with a digital camera, you just click away, click away, click away, and it doesn't cost anything.
Well, digital cameras are so, once you learn them, they're so easy to use, and a lot of the guesswork is gone, is totally gone. But the question should really be that, like when I started out at the very, very beginning, I learned on a 4x5 camera. And at that time, photographers that were working professionally, this would be like, um, I mean, I wasn't shooting then, but say even as recent as the late 50s and 1960, photographers were shooting 4x5 speed graphic cameras. Those are the cameras that you see in the movies where there's a flash bulb, and so you had to carry that heavy camera. You had to carry holders, which one side of each holder has the film, and you would slide your holder in, pull the slide, cock the shutter, focus, set your iris and your shutter speed, and hopefully all that is right on. Otherwise, you don't get anything. Um, that's why the quality of what was done when in the 50s and 60s is so good, because the format is so large. So anyway, I know that's going way, way back, but I really haven't kept up on the recent digital cameras, so I really can't speak for that. Other than that, I have 2 digital cameras and I love them. You know, you don't have to shop for film. Uh, there's a lot about them. You don't have to focus them. The color's right on.
We got a couple questions here, or comments, I should say. If you want to respond to these. Oh, before we get to them, I had one other thing I wanted to ask you about. Well, 2 things actually, but do you consider, I mean, is photojournalism art? Can it be art? Do you see a difference between art photography and the photojournalism, like where you're just documenting events?
Yeah. Well, I do, absolutely. I do. Um, there was a time when I was much younger when I didn't consider photography an art. Um, but as I've gotten older, and I learned, and that there are photos taken that are masterpieces, but I must say that that's rare. Um, I mean, in my case, like I can take a picture. I mean, I shoot a lot, just messing around all the time, but maybe once a year, do you take a photograph that you consider exceptional? Um, so it's pretty rare, but absolutely, photography is an art. I mean, I see photographs, and but the thing is that you don't get lucky to be there to shoot the photograph. because you've paid your dues. You've spent years in dark rooms, just working with your camera in different situations. You have all that experience behind you that takes years and years to get you to the point of taking a photograph. Um, but you may get lucky when you take the photograph, but for everything, for the lighting and your position, that's when you get lucky. But you certainly are not lucky to get to that point to take the photograph. Um,
Who are some of your favorite photographers? Whose work do you like? Anybody? I mean, who comes?
oh well, yeah. Carol, what is his name? Carol, is it Carolyn Cole? I guess. Yeah. Well, from the older people, like Joseph Karsh has always been one of my idols. He's a portrait photographer from Canada. Um, there's a lot of photographers that I came up with that I knew, the photographers that I would process film for in the late 50s and 60s were great photographers, but they weren't known at all. I mean, they were known locally, but not nationally or worldly, but they were great photographers, just Hollywood guys, making a living. Um, but I don't know, I'm drawing a blank. I can think of Joseph Karsh. Um, I like the fashion photographers, Richard Avedon.
And I meant to ask you about this earlier. Didn't you tell me that? I mean, Sid Avery was a sort of a big moment in your life meeting him, correct? And who
Yeah,
was he for people who don't know?
well, yeah, Sid Avery was a photographer. It's funny how I met him. I used to work for him way back. This would be again like in 1959. I took a friend of mine to Hollywood. He's going to apply for a job. And luckily, I parked in front of Sid Avery's studio. I had no idea who he was or what was going on, but I could see somebody setting up a studio shoot in there. So I walked in there, and so I talked to him. And coincidentally, he they were looking for somebody to help them in their photo lab, which they gave me a job. So I was able to assist Sid Avery on certain shoots. And yeah, he was a great photographer. Um, Other, like magazine, like Mark Kaufman, um, John Floria, there was a lot of life photographers that were incredible. Um, and today, obviously, there's people like Andy Leibovitz that are way out there.
It's too like Life magazine was a sort of it was such a great thing at the time to be able to get Life magazine, see great photography on a weekly basis, and now we don't really have anything like that anymore as far as
No, that's very true. And like I say, like 8 of those guys went to my high school, not at the same time, but they actually went to Fremont High School. Somebody says sometime do research on Fremont High School's photography department. I think they'd be surprised who came out of it.
well, I've got a couple of comments here, questions. Let me just see here. I'm going to ask you about them. You can just, I'll read them out to you. You can quote. This is from one of our people who's attending. There was a book recently published about how 1962 was a superior year for movies. Okay. Since some of your work took place during that year, what are your thoughts about films from them and your participation in them? Do you remember that year as being particularly significant for you, or?
Well, let's see, 1962.
I know a couple of our pictures in here are dated from 62, but
I know, like I said, when I worked at Columbia, people, the photographers would give me their credentials, a ribbon with a ticket to go into to see a film, and I never realized how lucky I was, to see the premiere showing of Lawrence of Arabia, Breakfast at Tiffany's, um, so many, West Side Story. Uh, but what's, yeah, I never, I know there were incredible films being done in those years, and it's funny when I got the opportunity to go to Columbia. The way I started at Columbia Studios is that I was working in another lab, and this guy that had the lease to Columbia Studios, his photo lab, he asked if I wanted to come and work for him. So I did, and so that, and it was, I believe, like 1960 that I just walked into the photo lab at Columbia Studios, and they had closed it recently, so it was totally deserted. But the point is that I thought that I wished I had been there earlier for the real what I felt at that time were that movies were over, but of course they were not, and television was beginning. The Columbia lot at that time had Screen Gems, and Screen Gems did um, like Father Knows Best, Dennis the Menace. I think they did The Monkees, um, Flying Nun. It's a lot of stuff that I didn't realize, that how important that was, well, or just interesting in any case. But I also I feel fortunate to getting away from that subject is to have known some of iconic rock and roll people like Jim Morrison and Frank Zappa, Johnny Rivers, the Rascals, to know them people personally and travel with them.
That's yeah, there's one thing we don't really have represented in our presentation tonight. You did a lot of album covers and things
Yeah.
like that, correct? So
I did. Yeah, I did. I love doing album covers because you kind of could be creative. As I mentioned, I did the liner photos on the first Jackson 5 album, and something that I'm real proud of, like I did an album cover for Booker T and the MGs, for the Rascals, for Johnny Rivers, Fifth Dimension, a whole bunch.
one of our comments here was just as a comment says, I'm glad George was part of the effort to record these moments of Chicano protest and social change. So that's a little
Richard, may I jump
Sure, yeah.
in there and ask a question for George about documenting all of that? And you were in the middle of protest, arrest. What did you feel about your own safety? Because you're in the middle of it, and do you have any comments on being in the middle of everything as it was happening?
Well, that's a good question because um, like I just mentioned, I had credentials to shoot entertainment, like movie premieres and stuff like that. I never had credentials to shoot riots and demonstrations. So you're on your own. You play it by ear, you learn, because you get it from both sides, especially if you're shooting anything Latino, Hispanic, Mexican, American related. The authorities, the LAPD and the sheriffs, they don't want you there, but also the people that you're shooting, your subjects like farm workers and people doing murals and or graffiti, and they wonder who you are, and they don't want you taking their picture. And so you do the best you can. You can't, approach anyone and say, "Do you mind if I take your photo?" You just do it, and hopefully everything works out okay. But there are times when you're in danger, but you kind of learn. There, I also often think of like shooting huge concerts when you're in the audience of a concert, and that mob moves as one, like the ocean, and you're stuck in there with 3 or 4 cameras, or or if you're shooting like in a disco and you've taken a picture and there's people in there that they don't want their picture taken. So you never know.
Did you ever get threatened by any of the subjects of some of your, particularly your celebrity pictures? Did people say, "Get out of my face"?
Oh yeah, people that not so much threatened, but they're very rude. They want to know who you are and what are you going to do with those photographs. And it's usually the guy that can't get arrested that's asking you that. But no, no, no. I only once or twice that somebody. Well, yeah, usually it's PR people, managers that tell you what you can or cannot do with the pictures of their client, and they have no right to say that because they don't. They just putting on a show for their clients, you know. But
One of our attendees had a question about, wanted to know if any locations that the clubs, restaurants, whatever, that you miss that are no longer here. Anything particular that jumps out at you that we've gone by the wayside over the years?
you mean that I would have had wanted to get a photo of?
Well, no, or the places you might just liked, you thought was a nice place to hang out or whatever.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Barney's Beanery in the '60s, it was like New Year's Eve every night. Um, so many places that are gone. Oh man, I can't.
Barney's gone.
Uh,
I haven't been there in a long time, so I'm not
well,
sure.
Barney's Beanery is still there, but the Barney's that I knew is gone. Years ago, when they sold the place, the first thing they took out was a counter, and that counter had dates in it going back to the '40s. I remember sitting at that counter having a bowl of beans with Frank Zappa. Those are the memories that I have. When I worked at Columbia, when I shot the doors, and I used to stay afterwards and work on my own stuff. And I recall Johnny Rib or um, Jim Morrison coming down one night, like 1, 2 in the morning, and we're looking at proof sheets. You know? Those are memories that I have, and yeah, a lot of places that are gone. That it's like the old. Um, oh man, what was that club that in the Roosevelt Hotel? That used to be something.
Roosevelt Hotel. Oh, that's before my
Oh,
time. I don't remember.
the
I'm
Cinegrill.
sorry. Oh, the Cinegrill.
Yeah,
Okay, do you
that
mean
may
that?
be there, but they remodeled that place years ago, and it's not what
Yeah.
it was. Yeah,
Um,
a lot of clubs, that are gone that were so easy to just go in and watch entertainment, but they're not around anymore. Even the whiskey is, I believe, has changed. I haven't been there in years.
it's not what it used to be. That's all I can tell you. So I
Yeah,
haven't been there in a long time either. But
there's also places like the old Hollywood Ranch Market on Vine Street. That's been gone for years, and
that was a place at 2 in the morning.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It was, you get a hot dog um, and then
So there was just a, I'm sorry, there was just a comment here. I just wanted to pass the comment along that we didn't really mention this in the webinar tonight, but in the article we did for the newsletter, you talked about how you almost fell into the fact you got interested in photography almost by accident because you took a course in high school because you needed an elective, correct?
right, yeah,
And it was like, it was like you were planning to take a photography class. You just needed something. So you did that and
exactly.
you got the bug.
Yeah,
And
yeah. It just happened. Somebody, this guy, I still remember his name. His name was Paul Labim. He said, "Take photography. It's easy." So that's what I did, and I was so fortunate. But like I say, people can do what I do, what I did, but you have to be prepared. You have to pay your dues. I mean, it takes a long time to know your camera, to sort of know what you're doing. It's very possible, but I don't know how it happens today, how you do it today, but probably can't be that much different.
Well, the
Although,
comment here was they're
that,
very glad you took that elective in high school. So, sorry. Go
you
ahead.
know, the biggest drawbacks, I think, to say working in entertainment in the Hollywood area are the unions. That's what it used to be, but that may have changed. I think maybe there's a lot more non-union production. But before, if you weren't in the union, you couldn't work. And if you were, you know, like Latino or African American, I mean, you couldn't work, period, you know.
Well, you had when you were like, say, a teenager in South LA, South Central LA,
Yeah.
did it ever occur to you you would be like hobnobbing with celebrities and then, meeting all these people and getting it also, but getting involved in a lot of the activist stuff and the progressive movements that were happening in the 70s? I mean, did it, if, this has
No,
been a journey for you.
no, no, not, no, I had never had a plan. It just happened. Yeah, you never know when it happens. You just, but like I say, it takes your whole life. I know that one thing I thought about a while back is that I wanted, you know, when the Latino Chicano movement began, I wanted to somehow be associated with the United Farm Workers and also with an organization called MALDEF. MALDEF is the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, because I would read a lot about them. And that's what I wanted to do to help them to be associated. I want to be like that. So in those cases, before I realized it, I was, you know, I just was. And you never know really when it happens. But also, the one thing about photography along those lines is that forever, half of your life, I think you're learning your camera. You're just learning your camera and how it works. So you don't have to think about it. So it becomes secondary when you actually start working. And I think that is something that happened, and you don't realize when it happens, but you realize that at one point it did happen. But I think in photojournalism, to being a photographer, there's a lot about learning the ropes, you know, and how things work. And well, it must be like everything else. But I feel very fortunate. I never, you know, until I did the book, I never really thought I was doing anything until I was told to recall certain moments. And then I did recall, you know, what I had to repeat, and these certain did that really happen moments. And that's when I realized, well, maybe I have done something. But to me, I never realized that I had the people that I respected more than myself were my friends that had real jobs, you know, like being on staff at NBC. My best friend, he was on that I went to high school with. He spent his whole life, other than when he was in the Marines, at NBC. And I remember that whenever I would introduce him, I would say, "This is my friend Gary Null. He's a real photographer." And I meant that, you know. But then most recently, a while back, I overheard him telling somebody, having a conversation with someone, and he told somebody that he always respected George, meaning me. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool, you know. Because like I said, I just thought I was poo-pooing my way along. I never realized I was doing anything. But just the whole body of work physically that I have makes me realize I was busy, because now I'm in the process of figuring out what to do with all my stuff.
Well, speaking of which, just going back and mention your book that came out a few years ago. It's pretty impressive. It's very impressive. It's incredible work. It's like, I guess, a career retrospective. You said it's currently out of print, though. Is that correct?
Well, I talked with the publisher today, actually, and I mentioned we had a conversation. I'm going to have more books soon, but he said that they did have a few, although the edition is almost sold out, or I was told it was sold out, that he still has a few. I don't know what that means, but they are Hat and Beard. That's the name of the publishers, Hat and Beard.
Hat and Beard, yeah, in case anybody wants it. And please tell me like some of your upcoming shows you're going to be involved in that are coming up or they're currently running. You mentioned a couple earlier when I asked you.
Yeah. Well, I've got to get some photos in the show right now at the Getty. I think it's called Unshuttered LA. I haven't been down there myself, but I know I have photos there. And in fact, I've been told that one of my photos is very prominent, large before you go into the show. And then I think in October at the Plaza de Cultura y Artes, which is a museum down there by Alvera Street, they're having a show on patriotism and conflict. I think it's called Patriotism and Conflict. But you know, and I don't know. There's always permanent stuff. You know, like the Museum of History. They have my stuff up there, and then also this Plaza de Cultura y Artes. They have a lot of my work that's up there permanently.
And for people who might be interested in finding out about upcoming stuff in the future, I just wanted to tell your website is they can go to your website and check that out, correct?
Well, yeah, I have a website, although I like everyone. I don't, you know, post a lot of stuff there. I should, and if I do have anything coming up, then I absolutely will post it there. Yeah.
And what is the website?
At least there's information there, and people can reach out to me, and you know, I can let them know whatever I do. WhittierArtist.com, George Rodriguez.
And there's a slash there, right?
Yeah, slash.
WhittierArtist.com/George Rodriguez. Well, I think that's it's been great. Any other sort of closing thoughts?
Let me say one thing.
Sure.
Of course, you know, like again, when I was a kid, you know, we lived on Skid Row, and then we moved, and LA to me, you know, I'm so fortunate to have been born and raised in this city, and I don't take it lightly, you know, that I'm doing this for the Los Angeles Historical Society. To me, that's so meaningful. It means a lot to me, because it's LA, you know.
Well, we're honored that you took part and gave us your time, because I know it's
Oh man,
it's been a bit of imposition on you, but thank you so much for helping out, and it's been great. And I think your work is fantastic. So I hope to see some more shows soon.